Okay, hello everyone. Yes, so my name is Erin. I am a professor at INSEAD. I study culture in the workplace. My first book, The Culture Map, was all about national cultural differences, but that's not what we are going to be talking about today. Today we are going to be talking about organizational culture and how to develop an organizational culture that fosters innovation and flexibility. And in order to do that, we are going to be looking at one of the most disruptive organizational cultures of our time. That is the culture of Netflix. So Netflix has managed to do something actually, let me just say one other thing. So you can hear that I have an American accent, and I am from the US, but I just came over from Paris, where I've lived for 25 years. And I think that's important as we go through this, because although this is an American company, it does seem to be working some of these things in Europe. So we'll talk about that as we go. So Netflix is a fascinating company to study. I was interested in them because they've managed to do something that almost no other company has managed to do, which is to reinvent themselves again and again as the environment changes around them. So it was not long ago that Netflix was a DVD by mail company, putting DVDs into envelopes and mailing them off to their customers. Then, of course, the environment changed, and Netflix reinvented themselves as an IT company, a high-tech company, now streaming old movies and rerun television shows out to their customer base. And then, of course, the environment shifted, and Netflix reinvented themselves as a media company, now hiring their own actors and directors and competing with companies like Disney. And some of you may realize this is extremely rare, this type of flexibility. It's kind of like the holy grail in our uncertain times where things are changing constantly. And their chairman and founder, Reed Hastings, believes this ability is almost entirely because of their highly unusual organizational culture. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Okay, now I did this big research project at Netflix. I interviewed hundreds of their employees. I spent a lot of time with their chairman, with Reed Hastings, and what I learned from this study overall was that the vast majority of companies today are operating with an industrial era hangover. And what I mean by that is that, of course, during the industrial era, we were all obsessed with error elimination, consistency, and replicability. And of course, if you are running a manufacturing plant today, or working in a safety-critical industry, these are still your goals. But in a growing number of companies and industries today, the biggest risk is no longer losing out on making a few mistakes or losing out on a little bit of efficiency. The biggest risk is now not thinking freshly enough or being creative or flexible enough so that the company becomes irrelevant. Now, I first came across the Netflix culture in 2009 when they released onto the internet this set of slides that went viral describing their organizational culture. And that set of slides begins like this. Many companies have nice-sounding value statements displayed in their lobby, such as integrity, communication, respect, and excellence. Enron, for example, whose leaders went to jail and which went bankrupt from fraud, had these exact values displayed in their lobby. And that brings me to my first point, which is that as you think about how to articulate an organizational culture that actually forms your employees' behaviors instead of as just nice words on a wall, as much as possible, we want to avoid talking about our culture as a set of absolute positives. And what I mean by that is like this word integrity. I mean, integrity is a great word, but there's no good credible option to integrity. Never have I come across a company that said in this organization, we are all about corruption. So instead, we want to think about what are the tough dilemmas that our well-meaning employees are facing on an ongoing basis, and say to them, you know, in this company, when we come across this dilemma, we lean right. And in doing so, our words impact the employee's behavior, which forms the culture. Now, I thought we would have a little bit of fun today, so I'm going to give you a couple of dilemmas so you can see what I mean, okay? Now, I'm going to give you a situation, and I'm going to give you two options as to how you can handle the situation, all right? And then you're going to vote whether you will do A or B. You vote raising your hand, okay? All right, so the first dilemma starts like this. You are a marketing manager, and you are leading a team of 8 marketing specialists. Now, you've got a great team, really good collaboration going on. It's just that you are in discussions with your own boss about a possible organizational change. Now, if this change happens, it's going to have a big impact on your team. People are going to get new colleagues. They'll get new bosses. Some of them might even be asked to move. Now, you don't know if this is going to happen. If it happens, it will happen in about 4 months, and it's about 60% chance likely to happen. But you do know, of course, that these discussions are going on. So my question to you is, are you going to share this? I can't get my slides working here. Are you going to share this information with your team now? Okay, so you've got two choices, right? Okay, so option A is no, I'm not going to tell them now, because if I tell them, they will probably get very distracted. They might get upset. Some of them might even start looking for other jobs. I don't even know if it's going to happen. So for the moment, I'll just stay quiet. Right? Okay, that's option A. Or option B, yeah, I'm going to tell them now, because even though it might be upsetting and distracting, I want them to know that I'm always as transparent and open as possible, and I hope that as I share as much as I can with them, that will lead them to feel ownership in the company and loyalty towards me. Okay, are you ready to vote? Okay, all right, so you got to vote everybody, A or B, there's no C. Okay, all right, so how many of you say A, I'm going to, for now, I'll keep the information for now, okay? Oh my gosh, so many A's. Okay, now how about B? How many B's do we have? How many of you have B's? Oh my gosh, so many B's. We have a dilemma. Okay, all right, now, in this case, I put into tension a culture of team stability. I put it into tension with a culture of organizational transparency, right? Now, of course, you can argue well for either of these, and either of these could be a good culture for your organization. What we want to avoid, of course, is saying, in this company, we're all about stability, and then we make choices that lead to instability. Or saying, in this company, we are all about transparency, yet we choose A, for example, right? Okay, can we do one more? Yeah? Okay, now this dilemma starts out the same way. You are still leading a team of 8 marketing specialists, all right? Now one day, one of the women on your team, this woman named Sheila, she comes to you and she is very excited. Sheila comes into your office and she says, boss, I gotta tell you, I've got a great idea for how to move the organization forward. She tells you her idea. I know it's going to be expensive, she says. I know it's going to take a lot of resources, but I really believe it's going to lead to great things for the organization. What do you think, boss? Can we invest? Can I get started? Now, you love Sheila's passion. The issue is that you don't think that this is going to work out. Okay, you think it's going to fail, right? So you say, hey, Sheila, thank you so much for your enthusiasm, but I have some concerns. right? You tell her your concerns and you say, you know what, let's think about it for a week and then we'll meet again. So a week goes by, a week later, Sheila comes back into your office. She is even more excited than she was the week before. She says, boss, I've been thinking about it all week long. I've been talking to a lot of people about it. I know the risks. I have some ideas for how to mitigate those risks. I really think it's going to be great. You know, what do you think? Can we move forward? Now, again, you love Sheila's enthusiasm, but you don't think it's going to work out. So my question for you, Sheila's boss, is, are you going to let your employee invest organizational time, resources, and money in something that she believes in, but that you don't think is going to work, right? Okay, so you have two options. Now, let me say, I know what you want to do. What you want to do is say, oh, you can do a small, inexpensive pilot, right? Okay, but that's not an option. Like, either you do it or you don't do it, okay, the way this is set up. Okay, so option A, yeah, you're going to say, no, you know, you're the manager in the organization, you're the boss, you're responsible for organizational resources, you don't believe in it, so you're going to find a way to say, hey, Sheila, please get back to work. Okay, that would be A. Or B, yeah, even though you don't believe in it, you've been wrong before, and you want your employees to feel empowered to make decisions that they believe in, and you hope that that will lead to a lot of creative and interesting ideas. Maybe something great will happen. Okay, so let's go ahead and vote. How many, are you ready to vote? Yeah? Okay, how many of you say A, you're going to find a way to say, dear Sheila, please get back to work? Oh my gosh, so many A's. Okay, now let's do B. How many of you say, okay, Sheila, you know what, I don't believe in it, but you can move forward. What do we got here? Oh my gosh, so many B's. I don't know if you guys can see around you, but we had like literally 50-50 in the room. Okay, we have a dilemma, right? And in this case, I put into tension a culture of innovation with a culture of error prevention or error elimination. And I think you recognize that very often these two things come into tension with one another. Because of course, you might want a lot of innovation, but innovation requires trying things out. Some of those things are going to fail. You're going to lose some money. Finally, something will work, and then innovation will happen. So, of course, you may prefer in your company a culture of error prevention, but these two things are in tension with one another, right? So we don't want to go around saying we're all about innovation and we are all about error prevention. Because if you do both of them at the same time, probably neither of them will work, right? Okay, now, my only point at this moment is simply that as you are thinking about how to articulate your organizational culture, as much as possible, we want to avoid speaking in these absolute positives, like the word respect. I mean, respect is a great word, but never have I come across a company that said in this organization, we are all about disrespect. So instead, let's think about how to articulate our organizational culture as a set of dilemmas. And in doing so, our words impact the decision-making in the organization, which then forms the culture. Okay, we have more dilemmas coming later. All right, now before we move forward and talk about Netflix specifically, I just need to make an important point, which is that when you're thinking about your own organizational culture, I can't get these slides to work. Can you help me? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I just want to reiterate that if you are working in a manufacturing plant, or if you are building airplanes, you are working in a safety-critical environment, that your goal is error elimination, probably, right? and that's in tension with innovation. What I want to talk about in this session is for those of you who feel innovation is more important than error elimination in your organization. And for that, I'm going to tell you a story. Before I do that, let me point out that companies like Michelin Tires, so Michelin, they have parts of the organization where error elimination and consistency is definitely more important than innovation, right? I mean, I do not think that we want to be using tires that are manufactured in environments that we're going to be talking about now, like with Netflix, right? So in these cases, stick to the lessons of the industrial era. But for those of you who are looking for how to create an environment that's fresher and more innovative and more flexible, and that's more important to you than error prevention, that's what we're going to be talking about now. Okay, so the next question is, if you desire to develop an organizational culture that fosters innovation and flexibility, then what would be the dilemmas that you should be focusing on? And for that, I'm going to tell you a story. So the first time that I interviewed Reed Hastings, the chairman of Netflix, he told me a story about his first company, which was an organization called Peer Software. Now, when Reed opened up PeerSoft, at the beginning, it was just a small group of people that were operating in an entrepreneurial fashion. And what I mean by that is that there were no rules telling people what they could and couldn't do. There were no processes telling people in order to make a decision, you've got to get approval from this person, or in order to spend money, you have to get sign-off from this person. Instead, everybody was just using their brains to make decisions as good as they could for the good of the organization. But then the company started to grow. It grew to hundreds of people and thousands of people. And as the company grew, some people did stupid stuff, and some people took advantage of the freedom that was allotted to them. So for example, there was this guy named Jim who flew every week from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Now, because there was no rule telling him that he couldn't, he started flying first class. And there was this woman named Charlotte. She had a little puppy dog that didn't like to be left alone. And because there was no policy saying that she couldn't, she started bringing the dog to work, who eventually chewed a hole in the conference room carpet. Now, as these things happened, Reed got frustrated. His organization didn't have this kind of money. So he sat down with human resources, and together they created an employee handbook. And in that handbook, there were all sorts of policies telling people what they could and couldn't do, processes telling people who they needed approval from in order to do this or that. Now, as that employee handbook started to take root, the thing is, it actually did prevent error, reduce error in the organization, and it did increase financial efficiency. But the thing is that something else happened at the same time, which is the freshest thinking, most high-performing creative thinkers in the organization, those people started to leave the company. Because usually people like that, high performers like that, want to work in a place that they can run free. Now, something else happened, and I'm just going to show you a short video of Reed Hastings talking about what happened next. It's just a minute and a half long. Let's go ahead, please.
You know, the great thing about being able to do two companies in my life is not making the same mistakes. So in the first company, as we grew and went public, we put in, a lot of process, because we had the idea, if we could just eliminate errors, think how good we can be. And so every time something went wrong, we put in a new process. And we were so proud that we dummy-proofed the system. And what we didn't realize is if you dummy-proof the system, only dummies want to work there. And so then the market changed, and all of the kind of innovative, crazy thinkers had gone, and everybody who was still there was really good about following the rules. But the market had shifted. This was the rise of Java and the internet. And we were unable as a company to adapt. And that's when it hit for me. Short-term optimization about being efficient is the death of long-term success and innovation. And that we should build a company in Netflix that tolerated some short-term chaos. And we manage right on the edge of chaos. And the value of that is keeping and stimulating the amazing thinkers. So when the market shifts, like DVD to streaming or license to expand to original content, we have within Netflix all kinds of original thinkers. And that's the long-term optimization that all of us in organizations want.
When Reed sold Pure Software and opened up Netflix, he had two overriding lessons driving his thinking. The first was employee freedom will foster high performance, innovation, and flexibility. The second was organizational process kills organizational flexibility. Right, okay. So with his new company, Netflix, he wanted to give employees an enormous amount of freedom in order to get the benefits of innovation. But he also had some concerns. He worried that if he didn't put into place these control mechanisms that we have at almost every company, as the company grew large, that the organization was likely to descend into mayhem. Not operate on the edge of chaos, but descend into chaos. So he thought about how to deal with that, and he came up with what we will call the Netflix experiment. And the Netflix experiment had 3 parts to it. The first was, okay, in most companies, in most organizations, the control mechanisms that we put in place are there to deal with the average or below average employees. So Reed thought, what if I were able to, as much as possible, develop an organizational culture where we had only high-performing employees. Usually high performers, they don't need to be controlled so much. So if I could do that, then I could get more high performance, which would allow me to give my employees more freedom, which would lead to more innovation. But he had another concern, which is Netflix at that time was a very poor company, and almost nobody knew them. How was he possibly going to attract these top performers? But Reed is a software engineer, and apparently he's aware of some research. I mean, software engineers are aware of some research that I was not aware of. And that research shows that if you take 10 people who are working in knowledge jobs, not working on a manufacturing plant, but working in knowledge work, that those 10 people all have the same training and expertise, that the best of the 10 will deliver 10 to 25 times the value of the average one. So Reed thought, well, I have a choice. Either I can hire, for example, 100 employees, average employees, and pay them an average amount, or I could hire 10 remarkable employees, not just with the right skills, but also the right attitude and the right collaboration, and I, if necessary, would pay them up to 10 or 25 times what I would pay an average employee. And he found in doing so, he could attract the best, and he would do what they call at Netflix, increase talent density. Okay, so that means you have less employees, but a lot more talent, right? A lot more high performance. He thought, then I could give them a lot more freedom, but I might still find that my employees try to take advantage of the freedom that's allotted to them. So what if I also tried to develop a culture where people were giving really open, candid feedback to one another, like all the time? So then, when Jim tries to fly first class, someone else will say, hey, Jim, that's not a good use of company money. And my workforce will then become accountable to one another. He thought if I were able to do those two things, then I could take the next step and give my employees a lot more freedom and responsibility, getting rid of all of those control mechanisms that we have in most companies. Okay, so that is what we will call the Netflix experiment, and we're going to explore each of those elements one at a time, okay? Now it is time for our next dilemma. Now this is the really provocative one. I'm a little bit nervous. I don't know what's going to happen. Okay, now this one starts out the same way. You are still leading a team of 8 marketing specialists. Now, a year ago, when you started this team, your goal was to create a high-performing team. So the first thing that you did was that you decided you were going to hire a lot less people in order to pool your budget together to attract the best. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing that you did was you left jobs open not just for weeks, but for months, waiting for the right people to walk through your door. That was painful. Then after you found those people who you thought were going to be the best, you hired them, you threw yourself into giving them feedback and coaching, and now, 1 year in, 7 of your employees are amazing. These 7, with the budget you have and the market available, they're the best. You can't do better. And then there's Fritz. Now, the thing about Fritz is he's not a poor employee. If he were a poor employee, you already would have found a way to get rid of him. He's just kind of, he's sort of mediocre. He's kind of adequate. Now, on the one hand, Fritz is a nice guy, and he does seem to be doing his best. On the other hand, it has now become clear to you after a year of coaching and feedback that Fritz is never going to turn in to that high performer that you hoped he would when you hired him. So my question for you is, what are you going to do about Fritz? Are you going to fire Fritz? Okay, I'm a little bit nervous, a little bit worried for Fritz in the room. Let's see what happens. Okay, so you have 2 options. Of course, option A is no, Fritz can stay on the team. You know what? He's just one of the 8, right? The other 7 are great, and you know what? He is getting some work done. So Fritz is safe. Okay, that's option A. Or option B. Option B, you know what? Fritz is going to have to go. Although he's just one of the team, you're investing huge amounts of time in him, and it's now become clear to you he's never going to be that high performer you hope for. He's going to have to go. All right, so let's go ahead and vote. Are you ready? Okay, how many of you say Fritz can stay on the team? Those are my A's. Oh my gosh, so many A's. All right, how about B's? How many of you say B? How many B's? Oh my gosh, so many B's. You guys are ruthless. You're ruthless. All right, okay. Now let me tell you, I want to tell you, when Reed opened up Netflix, he actually agreed at that time with the A's. Because on the one hand, he was trying to create a high-performing environment, but on the other hand, he believed if his employees were kind and hardworking and doing their best, and he let go of them, that would show to his teams, to his organization, that he wasn't loyal to his employees, and in return, they would not be loyal to him or the company. Okay, so Netflix opened in 1997. And by 2001, the company had grown to 120 people. Okay, small company doing okay with an environment around the office that was fine. Then in 2001, some of you may remember that there was a financial crisis. And Reed found out that he was going to have to lay off 1/3 of the workforce, or he would have to close the company. He felt he didn't have an option. So he sat down with human resources. They went through every name on the list. Now, first of all, anybody who was a little bit obnoxious or difficult to work with, clearly those people were going to have to go. But in addition, all of those kind, hardworking people who weren't managing to do great work, they were going to have to go also. He didn't have a choice. Okay, so that day came, the day of the layoffs, and that was a horrible day. People screamed and cried and slammed doors, just as bad as anybody had imagined. But then within about a 3-month time period, the most surprising thing happened, surprising to Reed, which was that his 80 employees that were left were now accomplishing a good deal more than the 120 employees had before them. And not only that, it was like his employees were madly in love with their work. They were learning together, challenging one another, growing together, and the performance in the organization was spiraling upwards. Now, Reed didn't know why this had happened, but he talked to a lot of employees, and he finally came to a conclusion. And his conclusion was, for high-performing employees with not just the right skills, but also the right attitude and the right collaboration, for these rare high-performing individuals, the best work environment is not about having a fancy office or some exquisite lunches. For these employees, the best work environment is about being surrounded by amazing colleagues. Now, let me tell you, Reed is not the first person to come to the conclusion that performance is contagious. We've also seen we've seen this with a lot of research. I have a colleague whose name is Professor William Phelps at another business school, and he conducted a research project where he invited 4 college students into his lab at a time, and he gave them a task, and he rewarded them financially based on how well they performed. Now, they were unaware that on 50% of the teams, there was an actor named Nick. And Nick had been hired to act just like any other college student, but to do some things that were undesirable. So sometimes he would act bored. He would put his feet up on the desk and he would text his girlfriend. Sometimes he would act obnoxious. He would say things like, "Have you ever attended a business school class before?" Now, what Professor Phelps showed was that those teams that had Nick on them performed at an almost 50% worse rate than those teams that didn't, even when the other college students were top of their class. Now, there's something else that Professor Phelps learned. I'm going to play a short audio clip for you of him talking about what else he learned. Here we go, please.
But what was sort of eerily surprising was how these team members would start to sort of take on his characteristics. So, for example, I mean, we videotaped all of these, and you would see that people would start. Well, so when he was a jerk, they would be a jerk too, right? So they would start being a little bit insulting or abrasive or obnoxious. And what was really interesting is they wouldn't just do it sort of in response to him, but also to each other, right? So there's sort of like a spillover effect.
So I've actually had the opportunity to watch these videos, and they're quite amazing. On one of them, you can see the 4 college students come into the room, well, 3 and Nick. And the 3 real college students, they're very excited to get that reward money, and they want to do everything they can to perform at their best. But Nick is playing a depressive pessimist. He doesn't think it's going to work out, and he's really low energy. And you can see they come in, the real college students, they're sitting up straight, they're energetic, they sit down, and Nick is kind of sitting like this, right? Minute 10 in the video, the 3 other college students, they start also leaning back in their chairs, kind of putting their feet up like Nick is doing. Minute 15 in the video, they also start to think it's not going to work out. They also start getting lower energy. Minute 20, one of the real college students puts her head down on the desk and says, "Oh my gosh, when is this going to be over?" So I just wanted to get you to think about this. I mean, most of us think that an individual performance problem is an individual problem. But we actually know from a lot of research that an individual performance problem is almost never an individual problem. It's almost always a systemic problem that impacts the entire team, sometimes the entire organization. Now, how you try, oh, and I have a quote from Professor Phelps. Next slide, please. I have a quote from Professor Phelps. I'm always sorry to have to tell you this. He said, "The best predictor of how a team performs is not how great the best performer is. It's not what the average member is like. Most often it comes down to what the poorest performer is like. In other words, poor performance is especially contagious." Now, how you decide to deal with the fritzes on your team and your organization, I mean, I leave that up to you. But I'll tell you that Reed considers this to be his Damascus Road experience, the moment in time that changed everything about the way he thought about business and how to run organizations. And, it's this that then led to the success of this amazing company. So Reed decided that he needed to do everything in the future to remain laser focused on keeping these high levels of talent density in the organization. But he did not want to do what companies like GE and Microsoft had already proven to be disastrous, which are systems that are sometimes referred to as rank and yank systems, where you take, for example, every year, every manager has to rate their employees from best to worst. At GE, you had to do this, and then fire the bottom 10%. That type of system has been shown to be extremely detrimental in organizations because it causes so much internal competition. So instead, he came up with something, and I know this is very provocative. I don't know if you're going to love it or hate it, but I do know it's interesting to reflect on, and I think actually you probably should all at least kind of go through the mental exercise. Something that at Netflix they call the keeper test. And the keeper test is basically this. Like, you go out, you decide tonight you're going to go for a walk. And while you go on that walk, you think about each of your employees. And you imagine Stanley on your team. He comes to you and he says, "Boss, I got to tell you, I'm leaving the company." And the question is that you ask yourself is, how are you going to feel when Stanley tells you he's leaving? Are you going to be devastated? Are you going to say, "Oh no, Stanley, don't leave me"? Are you going to do everything that you can to fight to keep Stanley on that team? If so, you know he's the right person for that organization, for that team spot. Are you going to be relieved? Are you going to think, "Oh, good. Now, thank you, Stanley. Now I don't have to spend all my energy on you. Now I can put my energy where I want, on my high-performing employees"? Are you going to feel excited thinking about who you could get in that job. And I do think, honestly, if you would feel either relieved or excited when one of your employees tells you that they're leaving, it probably means you have to ask yourself another question, which is, have you given that person the coaching and feedback that they need to succeed? And if you haven't, you know what? Please go give it right now. But if you have given it, and you have been giving it, and you would still feel relieved or excited, I think that's a sign that something needs to change. I'll leave that up to you. But let's imagine for a moment that you did manage some way to get every employee on your team to be the right person for that spot. Not just with the right skills, but the right attitude and the right collaboration. Imagine that you were able to get that level of talent density in your team. Now you could give your employees a lot more freedom, which would lead to a lot more feelings of responsibility and ownership on your team. But we're not done. Okay, are you ready for your last dilemma? Yes? Okay, now this one is not provocative at all. The question with this one is whether you will tell the truth. And I think with this, whether you would tell the truth, because I've sometimes seen people do not. Okay, now this dilemma starts out the same way. You are still leading a team of 8 marketing specialists, but you are no longer the boss of the team. Now you're just one of the other team members, okay? Now one day you go to a meeting with your colleague and a client. Now this colleague is a little bit senior to you, but he's not your boss. And you have a friendly relationship with this colleague, but you're not close to him. Now, during the meeting, your colleague does some things that you wish he wouldn't. So the first thing that he does is that he doesn't look at your client while she's talking. So like she's talking, and he's kind of looking at his paper, or sometimes he's looking at you, but he doesn't look at her. And you feel that that gives her the impression that he's not listening to her. You wish he wouldn't do that. The other thing that he does is that he talks too loudly, with too much volume, and your client's kind of a little bit of a reserved person, and you can see her almost moving back in the face of his volume and intensity. Now the meeting is over, and my question for you is, are you going to give this feedback to your colleague? Okay, now you have 3 options here. This time I give you a third, all right? Okay, you have 3 options. Option 1, yes. The feedback is actionable. I feel if he received the feedback that he would be able to act on it and do something about it. It would help him, it would help her, it would help the organization. I will give the feedback. Okay, option B, maybe. I might give the feedback. Now, he hasn't asked you for feedback. You don't know if he's going to appreciate receiving that feedback, so you'll wait and see. You'll wait and see if a good moment arises. Okay, that's B. Or C, I think honestly in this situation, I probably would not give the feedback. Okay, ready to vote? Okay, all right. How many of you say, A, I will give the feedback? Okay, now everyone, can you just look around for a second? Just keep your hands up. Okay. Like this is most of the room, right? Like 90%. Okay, a lot of A's. Now, how about some B's? Do we have some B's in the room? Okay, we got, like 10% B's, right? 10% maybe? Okay, how about C's? Do we have some C's in the room? One? No other C's. No, of course not. Okay. Now let me tell you, I had to add a C because I used to just have A and B. I will give the feedback or I won't give the feedback. And 100% of my participants were saying, I will give the feedback. Once I did this online, cross countries, cross industries, 3,000 people online, I had 3,000 A's. I was really surprised. Really? So then I started asking another question, which I ask you, which is, what about your colleagues? What about your team members? Would they give the feedback? Oh, no. No, they wouldn't give the feedback. In fact, I never receive any feedback at all. And I thought, wow, isn't that fascinating that only the people who would give the feedback come to my sessions? All right, thank you. Yes, okay, a round of applause for my audience. All right, thank you. All right, so, of course, the reason that this happens is because of something in our brain, which is that logically we all want to give the feedback and receive the feedback. This is your frontal cortex. The frontal cortex is the most logical part of your brain, and the frontal cortex loves clear, actionable feedback. The frontal cortex knows, if you tell me what to do, I can do better. Tell me. And if I tell you what to do, you can do better. I'll tell you. So of course your frontal cortex said A. The issue when it comes to feedback is your amygdala. The amygdala is the most primitive part of your brain, the most reptilian part of your brain. The amygdala is very focused on finding safety in numbers. So if you give me feedback telling me that something that I've done you feel is undesirable, it's likely to set off an alarm in my amygdala, and the alarm is screaming, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get kicked out of the tribe. And when that alarm goes off, it physically throws your body into fight or flight. Fight's like this. It's not true what you've told me. I'm not the problem, you're the problem. Okay, that's fight. Here's flight. Thank you so much for having told me that. I really appreciate that feedback. I'm really going to think about it. And then I try to never speak to you again. So we all, of course, know about the amygdala. And when we think about it like that, why would you give the feedback? I mean, you're not the guy's boss. Why would you risk ruining your relationship or making the guy hate you? Let someone else deal with that. So, of course, if you're right, you A's, you're right. We know from a lot of research the number one way to up performance in an organization is to get your employees giving clear, actionable feedback to one another after you get the right people in every seat. But the thing is, feedback is free, but your employees won't do it. Even if you tell them to, they won't do it unless you set a culture of feedback. And I'm just going to give you a few very simple ideas, things you can do tomorrow to get a culture of feedback going in your organization. The number one is, beyond teaching people how to give feedback, that you start putting feedback on the agenda. Let me give you a simple idea. What if at the end of the day today, you sent an email to your team, and you said to them, dear 10 employees, in the next week, I want each of you to set up a meeting with each of the others on the team, 20 minutes. And during these 20 minutes, you'll give her one thing you think she's doing well and one thing you think she could do to improve. And you'll give her one thing you think she's doing well and one thing you think she could do to up her performance. And then you'll meet with the other person. And then we'll come together as a team and we'll all report back the number one thing that we're working on based on this feedback that we received. That would get the feedback out there. Even the C, not just the B's, would give the feedback if you had them doing that. You can do with Zoom, you could do 5-minute feedback speed dating, where you send people for 5 minutes into a Zoom room. One thing I think you can do to up your performance, one thing you think I can do to up my performance, and then on to the next person. And then we come back into our main room and we report back one thing I'm working on. That would get the feedback out there. Now they're doing one thing at Netflix that I thought was absolutely crazy. Something that they call live 360 degrees feedback dinners. And the deal is that you go out to dinner maybe once a year with your team and you take turns. right? So like, if you're up first, then each person on your team goes around and gives you some feedback, right? So one thing I think you're doing well, one thing I think you could do to improve in front of the group, right? And then you go on to the next person. I thought this was crazy. Like, do you have to drag my weaknesses through the group? Can't you tell me that in private? But I saw if you have the right level of maturity and talent density on the team, that actually this can be a very interesting mechanism, because when one person gives you feedback, you never know, is it more about them or is it more about me? But when you get feedback in this kind of setting, you start to see, oh, actually, this is what I need to be working on. That other thing, that's just one woman's opinion. And I have this quote from one of my interviewees. He said, "Getting publicly ripped apart sounds like torture. Each time I go to a live 360, I'm nervous. But after you get started, you see it'll be fine. Because everyone is watching, people are careful to be generous and supportive with the single intention of helping you succeed. No one wants to embarrass you or attack you. Everyone gets a lot of tough advice. You're not singled out. When your turn comes, it might be difficult to hear what people have to say, but this is one of the greatest developmental gifts of your life." Okay, I don't know if your team is ready for that, but I did actually start doing them in my organization, and I found them to be very useful. Okay, now let's imagine that now, in addition to creating a high talent density environment, all those employees with the right skills, right attitude, right collaboration, that you've also got a culture of candid feedback going, where everyone is giving one another a lot of open, candid feedback, which is pushing the performance up higher in the organization. Now you are ready to do something dramatic. Now you are ready to get rid of all of those, or many of those controls that we have at most organizations that you won't find, for example, at Netflix. Now, when you look at them, they fall into, as you can see, 3 categories. Now, the first category is that at Netflix, their travel policy, for example, is the travel and expense policy is spend money in the company's best interest. And their vacation policy is take some vacation. Now, if you're thinking about this first category of policies and you're thinking, that's crazy, there's no way I'm going to do that. Don't worry, those are not the important ones. These are just symbols of freedom that say, dear employees, I trust you to behave like adults, and in return, they're more likely to behave like adults. But those aren't the important ones. Okay, now we also have at Netflix not very many process controls. So like those KPIs that you all use, I know you don't think of those as control mechanisms, but they are. Those are a way to put your hand firmly on your employee's shoulder, give them some freedom, but also to make sure that they are marching in the right direction. But you know what? Maybe if you had really good employees, maybe you wouldn't need to do that. Maybe you could let your employees run a little bit more free. But if you're thinking, Erin, that's crazy, there's no way I'm going to get rid of my KPIs, don't worry, that's not the important part. The important part is this middle category, and I really want to focus for a moment on this idea of removing decision-making control mechanisms in your organization. So in Netflix, they say 2 things. The first is, don't seek to please your boss, seek to do what's best for the company. The second thing that they say is lead with context, not controls. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of an image of this. So what that means is that in most organizations, you guys know them, right? In most organizations, our decision-making processes are like a pyramid. So of course, you've got your lower level employees who are at the bottom of the pyramids. You've got the chairman or the CEO at the top of the pyramid. The lower level employees, they can make small, unimportant decisions, but for anything expensive or important, it has to be pushed at least partially up the pyramid for some kind of approval. Okay, we all know the pyramid. But in a growing number of teams and organizations today who are seeking more flexibility and innovation, more agility, this idea of the pyramid is now starting to be replaced by the decision-making tree. And with the decision-making tree, the chairman is not at the top, he's down there in the dirt, at the roots of the tree, not telling employees this is what you can do and this is what you can't do, but instead saying this is our North Star. This is the direction we are running. These are the dilemmas that will form the culture, which will then lead to the decisions being made throughout the organization that will take us to our goal. And then, of course, we have the higher level managers who are at the highest level executives who are at those big branches of the tree, setting more context for their department or their organization. And then we have the lower level employees or lower level managers who are up there at the small leaves or branches. These are the people that are sometimes making the huge decisions. At Netflix, I saw these people making multi-million-dollar decisions, not saying, boss, can I or can't I? But instead thinking about all of the context that had been set for them by the tree below them, and then making decisions as good as they could for the good of the company. Now, going back to Sheila for a moment, you guys remember Sheila, right? She's the one I asked you. I asked you if you'd let Sheila invest money in something that you didn't believe in. But what if I had told you, you know what? Sheila, she is good enough to be on your team. You know what? She has got such good judgment, and she has fabulous collaboration. She's just the best you could get. Would you let her invest now? I hope so. Because if you can get a tree ethos going in your organization, that tree has 3 big advantages to a pyramid. The first is that a tree, of course, attracts more young top talent. You guys know the young people, this new generation, those top performers coming out onto the market, they want to work for trees, not for pyramids. So if you can get those trees going, you'll attract them, and they'll never want to work anywhere else. The other thing that you can do if you get that tree going is you'll see that a tree grows more quickly than its roots does, like what we've seen with Netflix, if the roots desire. And the third thing is that, of course, a tree is more flexible than a pyramid is. So if the environment changes, if COVID arises, something unexpected jumps in, our company is more agile and better able to spring off in different directions. It doesn't have a decision-making bottleneck built into it. So with that, I just end by this part. I end by giving you a quote from Reed. He said, as we gave employees more control over their lives and jobs, it began to dawn on me, freedom is not the opposite of accountability, as I'd previously considered. It is a path towards it. If you treat employees like adults, they will act like adults. If you give employees control over big decisions, they will become increasingly responsible and conscientious. In other words, give freedom to get responsibility. Okay, I know that this is crazy, what we've talked about today. And I know that many of you are perhaps, as we said, working in environments where error prevention, consistency is more important than innovation and flexibility. If so, if you are working for Boeing, please do not do any of the things I've talked about today. But for those of you who are seeking a more innovative, agile, creative ethos, maybe you can think a little bit about how to go for that tree and let go of some of the controls. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Thank you.